My guest today is Jamie Bambrick. And Jamie, I discovered you when I saw this brilliant YouTube video you did in June, I think it was.
10 questions for climate alarmists, I think was what it was. Yep.
Yeah, I am very impressed. Like I was just saying, I watched it again multiple times this morning, and I think it just does a great job of ripping apart climate alarmism in a very nice way and a very entertaining, nice way. So I'd love to know just how you put it together and what sort of experience you have with the climate scam, et cetera.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the big challenges actually facing the church is what we do about this issue, because I think there's been a book that's come out very recently which might interest you called Shepherds for Sale. It's written by Megan Basham, who's a writer for the Daily Wire. And in it, she talks about how a lot of leftist ideology has infiltrated the church. And actually, chapter 1 is on the climate issue. So it's just been released and details how a lot of this funding got in at the top levels of church movements, denominations, institutions, and has then flowed out into the wider church. Now, it was only just released, but I had certainly seen this in my background. My background is a pastor, and I've been in church and in ministry for nearly 15 years at this point in various different sort of roles and training and stuff like that. And it's been a real something that, particularly I think in the UK, the church has just embraced the whole thing and put a little bit of Christian veneer on. So I wanted to speak to it. It's obviously not one that you can go, right, here's the Bible verse that says that climate change is not as bad as we think it is, right? But what I'm endeavoring to do is bring what I think is scriptural wisdom, but also just applying some of the common sense, common grace wisdom, as you might call it, to these issues and go, right, well, let's actually look at the things that are being presented. And I like to do things in a wee bit funny and snappy way. So therefore, put this together relatively quickly. Obviously had done some research and so on and did a little bit extra for the video. But yeah, it seemed to go well. People enjoyed it. It took off, which was great.
Yeah, it's does such a good job of looking at the issues in detail. You have specifics in there about plant growth and so many other things. Where did you get that stuff? Did you read widely around the internet, or where did you get it?
Yeah, so a lot of it was stuff that I picked up over the years. Is like, I know there's a stat on the percentage of carbon dioxide. I'd seen a video. I was like, right, okay, let's double check that. What does that actually mean? So I've been interested in it for a good few years, having seen it really infiltrate a couple of churches that I know well, and therefore started to read widely. And then when it came to actually making a video, it was a little bit of refining and a little bit of, okay, let's just double check the work and make sure that it is clear and well put together. So yeah.
What sort of reception have you gotten from people around you about this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm fortunate in the context that I'm in the church that I'm in, that they're all very positive towards what I do, and we're broadly on board and like it and like that kind of style as well, which is nice. A lot of Christians will not share that perspective, particularly in a UK context. But generally speaking, I think people have found the video interesting, funny, challenging. And I think it is a good way to address these issues, right? Because it's very hard. The whole premise of it is every time you talk about these things, people say, you're not a climate scientist, which is true. I'm not. Of course, I'm not a climate scientist, right? And, but that doesn't mean that you can't think rationally, think logically, think clearly about things. And I think questions is a very good way to do that, and questions that actually bring up some of those stats and say, right, well, if here is actually a very valid question that I think we need to ask before we embrace what you're suggesting. So I think it was quite a good way to do it that maybe disarmed some people, hopefully.
Yeah, I love your approach as just maybe an everyman, an ordinary person, just looking around and saying, okay, where is the crisis, and asking these specific questions. I think it's extremely effective. And do you have plans to do any more of this, or is that a one-shot thing for you?
On climate, you never know. I think it's an issue that will be a recurring issue. I don't sort of map out all my videos. I do 1 or 2 videos a week, so I don't kind of map out too far in advance. I like to respond to things as they happen, or maybe you get a little moment of inspiration. But definitely it'll be something I'll talk about down the road in some fashion, I'm sure.
From your perspective, do you think there was any sort of organized effort to push climate cultism through churches around the world as like a top-down thing somehow?
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. It's well documented. Megan Basham's book Shepherds for Sale talks about this. She talks about how some very significant left-wing and non-Christian organizations got involved with things like Christianity Today and attempted also to speak into things like the ERLC, which is the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission Center or something. Can't remember what the C stands for anyway. It's the political action wing of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination in America. And these guys are giving huge grants to these very important institutions within church. So the Southern Baptist Convention, for instance, trains 30% of church pastors in America. Church leaders come through Southern Baptist training, even if they're not Southern Baptists themselves. They're very good at training. And so these institutions have come in with large grant money to fund research, which has basically come to our leftist, indoctrination session or whatever it might be. And so you get a lot of Christians that were pushing things very specific, not just a general sense of, as Christians, we should care about the world we live in, which I totally agree with, and I'm pro-conservation in many ways, and I'm even amenable to making things more efficient, and I love, why would we not do some of the very practical, beneficial things? We don't want smog. I get all of that, right? So I'm not saying there's no avenue in which Christians can actually talk about these things. But they were pushing very specific legislation through churches like cap and trade, for instance. So Megan Basham's book is very worthwhile. Chapter 1 talks a lot about it. I haven't come on here. She's not paying me to plug this. She probably should. Megan, give me a tenner. Yeah, so absolutely. No, it's been very, very strategic. And then there's also that side of Christians consume the media that everybody else consumes. They live in the world that everybody else lives in. And a lot of Christians just buy that and then think, oh, well, as a Christian, that seems like the good thing to do. Therefore, I have to do that. So there's a mix within that. But definitely there's been a very intentional effort to subvert churches on this issue for sure.
So maybe the details are in the book, Megan's book that I haven't read yet, but do you have any insight into the details of how the Pope himself started? He published this thing saying whatever, that we have to worry about CO2. Do you think someone else wrote that?
I don't know. So Megan's is dealing with evangelicalism specifically. So that'd be non-Catholic Christianity, which again is where I find myself on that. I do think that the Pope does actually believe in a lot of left-wing ideals. He has a background of doing so and came through really what's known as liberation theology. That's been a big influence in his life, which is essentially a Marxist version of Christianity. So he has said things like, can't remember the exact quote, but something along the lines of, communists is just another word for Christian. So that's how left-wing he leans. So it wouldn't I wouldn't surprise me if someone else wrote it, but nonetheless, I do think it's probably reflective of his actual position on this topic. That wouldn't be unusual.
Okay. And you are editor-in-chief of Clear Truth Media, it says here. Is that a full-time job for you or a side job?
Pretty much getting close to full time at this point. I'm also a pastor. I'm an associate pastor at a church here in Northern Ireland, so I oversee some of our small groups. Newcomers do a little bit of preaching as well within that. But Clear Truth is currently the bulk of my time. I'm working way too much, to be honest, because I'm doing all of these things. But yeah, Clear Truth's been great, and yeah, just been up and running since the start of July actually. So. That's been really good fun.
And one other influence on you is Alex Newman, or you mentioned him in the video that I love so much.
Yeah, his video is great. Absolutely. Yeah. So no, I did a little bit of research on him and have read some of his stuff, and he seems to be coming from a Christian perspective, I believe, on this as well, which is interesting. But I may be wrong on that, but that was my understanding anyway. So yeah, he's certainly a good voice to listen to and thinks through these things very clearly for sure.
Was there a process where you became more suspicious of the whole climate thing as time went on, or did you right away realize that this thing didn't make sense?
Yeah, good question. So I think for me, a couple of things that probably piqued my alarm bells, or set off alarm bells, piqued my suspicions, right? So firstly, I went to a Bible college in Sweden, which sounds strange to an American, but Europe, there's a little bit of overlap there. It's not quite the same in terms of just going to another state, but it's not too far away. But Sweden is one of the most liberal countries in Europe, socially and politically. And the Bible college that I went to was actually very aware of this and did a lot of good work in, preparing us to meet with and interact with a world like that. They were ahead of the game. So this was back in 2008. I was out there. You had some sort of, climate movement. There always had been. We were told oil was going to run out the whole way through school, and, all of that stuff, right? And global warming became a thing later on. And then it became climate change because it wasn't warming all that much. But they certainly had an awareness of these things, and that environmental movement was already existing there. So I think that gave me a good foundation for recognizing some of the potential issues with it. And then I think I just saw, one thing that this is a moment that really struck me, and this is, again, I'm speaking as a pastor and a Christian here, right? So that's my world, that's what I've lived in. But I was I was on staff at a church, and there was a moment where the church decided that they were going to get rid of disposable cups for tea and coffee at the end, and instead provide everybody with a reusable cup. But nonetheless, okay, it's reusable, so therefore it must be better, and has no toxins or anything like that. These cheap plastic reusable cups, and I actually was really. It was one of the most frustrating moments, not because of that. I didn't really care. I was like, fine, do whatever. I mean, I don't mind. What frustrated me was when it got announced to the church, it got the biggest cheer of anything we'd ever done. A spontaneous applause and cheering. And I was like, this is not our business as the church. It's not our fundamental business. There's a way in which the church has a duty to things like this. Like, the church lives in a context, it lives in a wider world, it can speak to these things. I obviously have with this video, right? But that was disheartening because, we're talking about it, where you see people coming to faith, which as a Christian is the best thing that we want for everybody, right? And or you see someone get baptized, or babies being born, or all these wonderful things, lives changed and turned around. And this is what we're really existing for as the church. And yet the biggest cheer was for a sort of virtue signal on environmentalism. And then I realized, I was like, I can't abide this. Like, this is a problem. And didn't then begin to immediately do anything about it. But that certainly for me was a moment where I went, this is actually getting placed on a level that I don't think it should sit at all. For the church, even if everything was true about it, even if it was all correct, this would be inappropriate. And yet, I think a lot of Christians have bought into that. So for me, that was certainly a key moment in my development as to, how I felt like this is a real problem, actually, particularly for Christians.
Very good. I would like to dig into your video and why it was so successful, really figure out why it was so successful to help the rest of us out, because I have it up here. This is the only one you've done on climate. It's a little under 15 minutes long. It has over 9,000 likes. People, it's not just me. It's so popular. And so let's try to dig into that. A part of it is your personality, I think, that it's just coming through, that you used a lot of sarcasm. That's not supposed to work on the internet, but it's like light sarcasm, and there's so much humor in it. So do you think humor is one of the big reasons why it succeeded, or what are the factors that made it so successful?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, in Northern Ireland, sarcasm is our love language. That is what we do to ingratiate ourselves to people. If you come to Northern Ireland, particularly, actually more so even than the South, um, if someone likes you, they will immediately start making fun of you. It's a sign that you're comfortable with that person. It's not something that travels particularly well and gets us in lots of trouble when we go elsewhere and everybody thinks we're being rude. But in reality, it's actually meant to be nice. But yeah, I think when something is patently ridiculous in many ways, when it is there's a lot of cognitive dissonance within this whole ideology. I think a very effective tool is to make fun of that and to point that out. And, if you just do, I mean, hey, lots of people have done very long, informative videos that have got lots of views and done very well. So that's all very worthwhile too. And it was obviously the foundation for this. But I think for a lot of normies, and that's who I always try and think about myself as being for the average person, right? I'm not trying to speak to at the top intellectual level of anything, and not really even on the areas of theology or whatever it might be, which are more in my sweet spot. I certainly feel like I'm not fully qualified to speak at the absolute top level of that stuff, and neither do I want to. I actually really am much more interested in reaching everyday people. And so I think for people like that, what you want to do is you don't want to abandon the logic or the underlying arguments. You want to repackage them in a way that's accessible and bite-sized and feels like anybody watching that video never heard of these things before or never really considered these things before. If you can repackage that in a way that's accessible, then it's very helpful to do so, right? So humor is something that I like to use, and I think a good part of the reason why people watch it is as hopefully a pretty funny video.
Yeah, so you really were targeting the normies. I think that's so important. I don't know what percentage of the people we would classify as normies, but it's almost all of us, right?
Right. Yeah. We're all normies in some area, right? So you'll have areas. We'll all have areas of greater expertise, but in most areas you're a layperson. Like in most areas you're not an expert in that area, and so I think that's if you're speaking to normies, you're speaking to the broad swathe of the population, but they're also the ones that vote. They're also the ones that act on things. So very important to reach them for sure.
And I also see that there's 1,800 comments on that video. Did you keep track at all of what's going on in the comment section?
No, I'm not a big, I mean, a little bit, to where like the top comments, I'll quickly scroll through and, put a couple of likes or maybe pin one every now and then. But generally speaking, I don't try and track through that level of comments, and particularly because it's so easy, right? If you see ones and someone goes and writes a full essay trying to push back, and you're like, right, do I spend my week replying to this or do I just move on? So I love people that comment. I love whenever people do that. But in terms of trying to track with it too much, when it gets to that level, I certainly don't keep track of everything.
All right. And then there is a certain audience that'll watch the whole 15-minute video, but I think there's a whole other audience that'll watch a 20-second clip from that video. Do you have any plans or do you pull clips out and put them on other platforms at all?
I would love to. I really need to. I want to. As I said earlier, I'm working too much at the minute, so going and repackaging stuff. I did actually have someone very kindly offer to help me do that, so I certainly plan to and would love to. I just haven't got around to it at this point. But yeah, I think it'd be very helpful because those are things that then have viral potential, and you make one of your 10 questions suddenly goes as, okay, that's actually a really good question, sticks in people's minds. So would love to do that for sure.
So that's a good point. That would you be okay if other random people on the internet take clips from your video, put them up and credit you, put them up on X?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. By all means. Yeah. That's how lots of people end up going viral. Someone else takes their stuff, and yeah, feel free. It's no problem as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I do. I think we need a lot more of that just over here in the climate world. I think there's a lot of people out there that are interested, and one way they could really help push this message or get our message out is to make those clips themselves and put them up.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, do it. Yeah, do it with subtitles as well, because people don't know the Northern Irish accent, and I speak quickly, unfortunately. So people may struggle, especially if they're not English speaking natively. You know, I think for me, there's a few things that are probably very helpful when it comes to breaking a topic down for people. So I suppose one of it is just communicating with multiple different things happening. We live in a very short attention span era, and we can bemoan that. You can say everybody should go and read, 10 books, but most people don't have time. Most people have lives, and most people have, a lot going on, and they can get 70 to 80% of the benefit of that in a shorter format. And if we can think, rather than writing a thesis or rather than writing a book, hey, great to do, because everybody has to draw. You have to have some underlying stuff to draw on. So I'm not denying that as totally valid. But if you're thinking about how do you reach the maximum number of people with a message, making it bite-size is certainly a very effective way to do that. And you will reach an audience that are, usually speaking, you'll reach an audience that are less interested, although they probably should be interested, right? Because the very interested ones will probably put the work in and read the book. The ones that, this is a big topic, everybody else, or everybody else in your sphere maybe knows why this matters, but actually the wider world isn't quite as attuned to that. So I think if you can go right, rather than how do I make every point, and this is something I see a lot of people do. I see pastors do this with sermons, where it's like they didn't leave anything they knew out of it, and that became long and boring. And you can say some of what you know, right? You don't have to say everything, because the average person there doesn't need all the background and the Greek and 5 stories. It's like you just make it punchy, say the main thing. So I always look at my videos through that as like my main lens is what do people need to know? What could they know? What is everything? What do they need to know? What are the key bits of information that will make the biggest difference? I do that with everything that I do online, everything that I do even in sermons, and it's not on the same level, of course, because we're in a smaller church context. It's a medium-sized church, but it's not reaching however many thousands will watch a video. But what do people need to know? And I think if you can frame it as that makes it very, very helpful, because you know what the mission of your communication, whether that's video or article or whatever it might be, even giving a talk or a lecture or anything like that, unless you have a captive audience that's sitting there for weeks or months on end, or you're teaching in a university, then you give everything you know. But for reaching the masses, it's what do they need to know? What is the essential piece of information? Then I like to set that up. I always try and set things up with an interesting hook. You got to draw people in, because most people, and this is true on YouTube, but this is true in every form of communication. Again, going back to that thing of most people are not as interested as you are, and you have to realize that. You have to realize that they actually have. If we take YouTube as a good example of it, right? They are being shown, as they are watching your video, the other things they could be watching. It's right there. It's on the screen. Click here if you don't like this one. Here's a better one for you to watch now. And so what you have to do is you have to convince people why they should care about this. You have to draw them in, and you can do that in a few different ways. You can do it with a promise of information. A promise of, if you watch this, you will learn this. And if it's an interesting bit of information, so the title is helpful, 10 questions for climate alarmists, people immediately know, oh, that's what I'm going to get if I watch this. So you're making a promise that you're going to deliver on there. Also tying it in with, what's always very helpful actually is tying in big principles into something current or newsworthy or cultural, right? Because most people don't have long memories and maybe aren't thinking in macro terms, but they know who Greta Thunberg is, they know who Bill Gates is. I chuck those on the thumbnail. People go, oh, this has relevance. I know what this is going to be about. So you're tying in. Now, I didn't really address those people in significant depth, but they are representative of this movement in a way that's very accessible to people that don't know other figures involved. And then I think early on, setting it up with, so I think including some humor, like if your tone is this, keep that tone in, get that tone in early. So if you're going to be funny early. There's no point being funny 15 minutes into the video. They aren't watching 15 minutes into the video if they're there for funny. It can feel like a strange change of tone. So if you're factual and informative, be factual and informative from the start. If it's deadpan, keep it deadpan. If it's sarcastic, be sarcastic. Whatever it might be. If it's entertainment, if it's Mr. Beast, the first 5 seconds are always the most, in your face 5 seconds that you can get. And that just tells people that this is what you're getting with this video. So that's very helpful. And then setting up. I always like to set it up as a problem. So overall, if we think about story, I try and view all of my communication, broadly speaking anyway, through the lens of a story. Stories have an arc, and the arc is always set up as, here's a problem. What any good story? There's a ring of power. There's a Death Star. There's ghosts, and we need the Ghostbusters or whatever it might be. Here's the arc. Like, here's the problem. And so with this video in particular, you take it as an example. You set it up as, so I set it up through the lens of, when I realize any issues that I'm hearing about on the media are not really reflective of the reality that I see, and certainly not reflective of what we're being told to do about them in terms of just the complete reorganization of our economy and the loss of civil liberties and all of that. But whenever I raise that to someone who's a believer in this movement, not a Christian believer in this sense, but a believer in the movement, it's the same pushback every time. You're not a climate scientist. You have nothing to say. You're not permitted to talk to this issue. And so I set it up as that. It's like, right, well, here's some questions then, right? If I'm not allowed to make a claim, if I'm not allowed to present a position, then I'm at least allowed to present a question. And I'm at least allowed to present a relatively informed, detailed question that actually does have some information in it. All of these questions contained information. But nonetheless, I'm not sitting there as the authority. I'm not sitting there, going, right, here's I've done a doctorate on, whatever climate subject you want to name, right? But as a layman, here's the questions that I have, and I think they're important questions. And so I think setting it up that way was something that a lot of people can recognize. It's like, oh yeah, I've heard that pushback. I get told that, or I at least have seen that being said of everybody gets rubbished. All the lay people who think that maybe driving a car is actually okay and a good thing and helps you get around, or rising fuel prices, particularly for the most impoverished in our society, is a bad thing. We're always told you have to trust this cabal of people in charge. And so I think framing it that way is a helpful way to frame it. So I think framing things like that is really good. Frame it with, what is the problem that you're solving? Thinking through, right? Like the everyday person, or whatever your target audience is, they are probably struggling with something in this area. There's probably something that they recognize is an issue. And if you can speak to that, and then over the course of the video actually deliver on what you've promised, actually give the points you've said you're going to make, actually ask questions that would push back on this, that they can then go and give to people as they're in conversation, or whenever they hear something in the media, they can actually go, no, I have a filter for that question now. Like, I was told that carbon dioxide is this, but actually, well, what about the actual percentages of that, and what percentage of that are we producing, and can we do anything about? All, those are really important and helpful questions for people. So I think if people can do that, it becomes very effective communication. And last point on that, sorry, I've gone on a wee bit long on this question, but hopefully it's helpful, is the emotion of delivery is important. And people will rarely, this is a cliche, but it's cliche for a reason, which is people won't remember I can't even remember if I'm getting it exactly right, but people won't remember what you told them, but they will remember how you made them feel. And that's true actually in communication as well. Emotion, it is not wrong. You're not manipulating people's emotions. You're not being deceptive, but it's not wrong to go, right, what do I want people to feel as they're reading this? Because people are very instinctual. People broadly respond instinctively. People have bought into the climate thing really for emotional reasons more than logical ones most of the time. So some people will have done more reading or whatever, but most people will be sitting there going, well, I care about our planet and I've been told that I'm destroying it by doing this stuff. I don't want to do that. Ergo, I'll go along with all of this and I'll vote for the policy, and that's my bit. I've ticked my box. I've done my part. But emotional appeal can also be used for truth, right? And should be used for truth. I don't know why truth should be boring and lies should be entertaining or engaging in an emotional level. So if you make a video that actually hits, so mine kind of hit on an emotion of fun and humor in all of this, and that was consistent. You could do the same kind of video and you could do it serious and dark, and you could do it in a way that hits a very different emotion and it would appeal to a whole different group of people and be very effective communication. Or you could do it in a way that's very, I don't know, just pick an emotion that's curious. You could do a documentary out of this that'd go round and it would be inquisitive or whatever. It would hit a different emotional tone. So I think that is something that good communication keeps in mind, is what are people feeling, and is that, am I able to kind of keep that? So you can shift it over the course of something, but to think about that, because we are more than just intellectual beings. Jonathan Haidt has written a very good book on this, The Righteous Mind. Don't know if you nodded there, like you know it, so, or at least know his work.
I know his work, yeah.
Yeah. But it's very good. He talks about basically most of our decisions and framework for things is gut level, and then there's post-rationalization that happens. You can complain about that, or you can go, well, that is how humans are wired, and therefore we need to speak to that. We need to speak to the heart, not just the head. So I kind of think that those are some real keys that if anybody out there is looking to, on any issue, speak effectively, that's probably a helpful framework for doing so.
All right, very good advice there. One technical question is, were you targeting just people who were actually watching the YouTube video? Because this morning as I was doing other stuff, I was just listening, and it was very effective, just audio only as well.
And so, no, I mean, it all fits together. I'm aware that whenever you're watching, or whenever people are on YouTube, I do it myself. A lot of the time you put the video on, you got the headphones on. If you've got YouTube Premium, it's maybe playing in the background in your pocket, or the laptop sitting elsewhere, you're listening in the background. So you have to think about audio only, certainly for short form. I think obviously you did, you got the climate movie, and, that's not designed to be a background thing necessarily, so that's slightly different. But I think in short form, you just have to recognize how users are actually using or applying your stuff. And so that's important. Nonetheless, though, I think for YouTube, the visual element is very important. Most people, certainly, so if I look at where the waters that I swim in more, which is the Christian theological worldview space, that's where I kind of sit. One of the reasons why I started my channel actually was I was getting very frustrated because everybody was just doing a podcast on video and no one was speaking to anybody that didn't have time for that or wasn't able to engage with that. And I realize there's a big world out there that actually there's a whole bunch of people getting missed. So the visual side matters a lot on YouTube, getting attention. So overlaying, shifting the visual, using text to, you know, highlight key points for clarity. You know, and again, you can get little visual gags or whatever out of it too. You know, you use a video clip of something funny or whatever the case may be. But yes, you have to recognize it's going to be used in both of those ways. So if you make something on YouTube and you throw a graph up there, but you don't actually describe it in any way, the people that are only listening don't actually know what you're talking about. So you have to do that too.
So you mentioned Climate the movie, and one thing that I would mention is Martin Durkin is working on a follow-up of a bunch of short form content, a follow-up to that to try to shift the narrative and make people realize it's a scam. Do you have advice on what he should be doing, on what platforms, or what to emphasize, or any other advice on what would be effective as a follow-up to Climate the movie?
Yeah, good question. Staying on message is really, really important if you want to get the masses to move. So picking the key message, and there are different ones you can pick, but really doubling down on the essentials. So whether that is to do with corruption, or whether that is to do with the underlying science behind it, or whether that is to do with the long-term destination of what this will actually cause if we go the route that we're currently going in the Western world, net zero being what the term here in the UK is what everybody's pushing, and, you know, all of that stuff. I think picking one of those and really hammering in and just hit that message over and over and over again as many different ways as you can. I think that probably is the thing. I think one of the things that is interesting, and forgive me, I don't know where you're at, you know, politically. I'm not trying to get into a political back and forth either. I probably have a sense, because you don't believe in climate stuff, that you're not a far left activist. But I think, you know, other areas, you know, we could disagree, right? I think one of the things that the Democrats are very effective at doing is keeping the message the same. And the message is Trump is bad. And that is the only message that anybody ever needs to hear. And if anybody gets you off message, you get back on that message. And that is it. And I think with conservatives, and you look at the Republican Party, we switch message way too often. I say we, so you know I'm conservative, right? I'm not in the Republican Party because I'm Northern Irish, but that I'm conservative in my beliefs and would vote that way. You know, so it's less than a month ago at the time of recording, at least, and it will still be less, or it might be just over a month ago at this point. But anyway, it's about a month ago at this point that Donald Trump was shot in the face, and conservatives are not talking about that anymore. That the opposition allowed their political opponent to be shot in the face. And we have moved on from one of the key political moments of the last decade, century, maybe. And in 2 weeks, the conservatives allowed the news cycle to shift and did not hammer that point home and did not make the deal of it that they should. So I think key message, driving that home is a really important part of communication. That doesn't mean you can't tie in other things, but always having that thread in there of, so let's say you want to address other issues, like let's say you want to address the science, but you decide that the main message is corruption. You can include that element of the reason why we believe this is corruption. You bring that in there, you tie it back. That's corrupt, it's corrupt, it's corrupt. Or if the key message is, here's the long-term negative outcomes and how this actually will destroy the lives of people that are less well off, and this is, you know, really a belief for the upper middle classes. And you go, if we believe this science, you know, so you could tie into the science point again, but you go, but by the way, this is the negative effect of doing that. This is where this leads. So I just think that's a key part of messaging, is to ensure that whatever angle you're taking, that message comes back in. People that do this well are able to change the game on that, and people that let the message get to one way, or, they get split. The 1 week it's here, 1 week it's here, 1 week it's here. That actually is less effective. And it might sound slightly tedious. It might sound like, oh, we've got to make that point again. Yeah, you have to make that point again. Yeah, people have not got it yet. And until it shifts, that needs to be the message.
Okay. Another thing about messages that you do a great job in your video is you talk about things sounding nice, but what it really is. So here's one example. You talk about 15-minute cities, which sounds nice, but that's really just barriers and stopping people from traveling. I think you did a great job throughout of saying it all does sound nice what they're selling us, but then you're translating it into what it really is. So kudos to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that is so often the case with stuff like this, and it goes back to that emotional manipulation thing, actually, of everything gets framed in nice language. Here's the world we're going to get. But you look under the surface and you go, no, that isn't what's happening at all, and we see that that's not what's happening at all. So, I think, yeah, that's often the way. If you take communism as an ideology, somewhat related to this overall topic, you can make it sound, oh, everyone's going to be equal. No one's going to have less, no one's going to have more, and you can frame it, and then you realize, oh, that just means that the government has everything and everyone has nothing, and right? That's probably not a good way to go, actually. And I don't know how loving it is to insist that my neighbor who has more than me should give me their stuff. Like, not they free willingly give it because they like me, but at the point of a gun, or you go to jail if you don't give this person your stuff. How's that a nice message? So yeah, I think it's good to push back on some of that stuff, and to reframe it actually is very important.
All right. Any other points you'd like to make before we finish this one up?
Let me think. I think if people are looking to communicate on these issues, I think a big place actually is to encourage people to start. If someone's wanting to speak to stuff, I didn't start really having any idea of what I was doing on YouTube. I didn't have any idea of where it might begin. It's developed, it's gone well, it's led to jobs and connections and all of that stuff. Most things, you could sit there and you could go and do some communications degree, or you could sit there and learn, or you could just sort of have a go, read some books as you go for the stuff that you need. Have your areas. You need to have some areas that you're strong in. You don't need to be stronger than everyone in that area. I think that's often a thing, is that people rule themselves out of speaking to something because they are not the top 0.01% of people in the world. But again, if you're speaking to normal people, you just need to know a bit more than them to be able to help them. So I would encourage people, if you want to speak to issues, if you feel like you have a voice on a topic, just get started doing it. Do it well. Learn from people as best you can. Do a little bit of prep that you kind of have an idea of your direction. But it certainly won't start perfect. But if you actually start, you will get better as you go. There's the old adage, don't know how true this is. I think it's probably true. Doesn't matter if it is or not. But it's that story of the pottery class. They assigned them into two different groups, introduction to pottery. And one group, they told them, make as many pots as possible by the end of the day. And another group, they said, make one pot, but make it amazing. And what turned out to be the case was the group that had made as many pots as possible by the end of the day made vastly better pots than the person who was trying to make just one pot. That was perfect. Because actually you really learn by doing. You learn by getting stuck in. You learn what you know. You learn what you don't know. Sometimes that means, you say something and you go, actually, I didn't quite get that right and I need to reconsider. And that's okay if you're humble rather than being perfect. If you're willing to go, sometimes there's been issues where I've changed my mind on things. I haven't drastically changed my mind on anything major. I have a good foundation, certainly on the stuff that matters most. But there's no problem with doing that, and you can still be very effective and help people if you're willing to do so imperfectly. Anything worth doing is worth doing badly. And you start doing it badly, and then it will get better.
All right. Thanks for taking the time. You are a very successful communicator. We can learn a lot from you. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's been a blessing.